Welcome to the Building and Growing podcast. We're delighted to have Melvin Chen with us. Welcome, Melvin.
Thanks for having me, Lucas. A pleasure to be here.
You're most welcome, mate. So look, Melvin is an investor and a serial entrepreneur. I think, there's tons of different pieces that you've worked on in the past, from Goldman Sachs to Terra Firma. I know you were at StarLake. I believe that's an investment company that you founded. You worked at Alibaba later on, as well as Latch. You've done a whole range of different things. So we're delighted to have you here today. But I think it's best that actually, you introduce yourself, talk to us about, what you've done sort of since the beginning, where you grew up, mate. We're delighted to have you here.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I guess I'll start right at the beginning. I was born in mainland China, in a city called Chengdu, which is known for the panda sanctuary. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, nice.
And at a young age, I was brought to the UK by my parents. I had a twin brother at the time.
Nice.
We were always really competitive in sports, and so that's the other side of it, is that the other passion I have in life is sports.
Yeah.
I've been doing a lot of that, from boxing to triathlon to these days I'm doing more tennis and golf. But we're educated in Oxford University, got to go there, and was a bit of a privilege to do that. Did joint honours in economics, but also with material science.
Wow.
So engineering, undergraduate master's course, which they actually don't do anymore. It was a great course called Material Science, Economics and Management.
Okay.
But it was so complex and intensive that they decided to just sort of disband it, which is a shame. But so I'm one of a kind in terms of there's not many of us out there.
Yeah.
And the course is interesting. The course was set up to train business people for the engineering industries.
Okay.
Specifically for British companies like Rolls-Royce and whatnot.
Yeah.
But the reality is a lot of people from that, it's a very strong course at Oxford, went off to do consulting or investment banking or into commercial companies. And when I was going through the course at the time, everyone was going into private equity.
Yeah.
All the smartest people were going into private equity. So I followed a little bit, but also because it was just great training ground for learning the operations of companies at scale. So I joined a company called Terra straight out of university. And that company was doing buyouts in Europe, but also in other parts of the world. There was a portfolio company doing beef in Australia.
Wow.
And then there was a cinema chain called Odeon and UCI, which subsequently we sold. We ended up selling that to a Chinese conglomerate called Wanda.
Wow.
So that was my first experience, which was a baptism of fire, where you get thrown in the business deep end, and you're expected to do all-nighters, and you're expected to do financial models, but also go into the companies like Odeon, UCI, or Four Seasons Healthcare, which was the largest care home group in the UK, and help optimize operations. And that's where my interest in the operation, this now what's called Rev Ops, initially started. Is like, how do we improve companies? How do we improve processes? And how do we do it in a way that we can measure scientifically? So that was the beginning. But I always knew that I wanted to be an entrepreneur. Even at university, I was doing projects like, for example, I published a guide to getting finance internships.
Okay.
That was really hot in the time, and I'd got an internship at Goldman Sachs and Man Group scholarship. So that was one of my projects, and I sold that around different societies in the UK.
Nice.
So I always had this entrepreneurial bug, and so I did private equity for about 4 years. So I was at Terra Firma between London and Beijing. So I got to go to Beijing.
Nice.
And then I joined another firm called Samena, which was actually based in Dubai. So I was based out of Dubai for a couple of years, doing deals in Asia, more mid-cap, smaller deals compared to Terra Firma, which were billion-dollar deals. At that point, I saw companies like WhatsApp becoming very successful, being acquired by Facebook, and I was really inspired by Airbnb, which in 2015 was the company that was growing tremendously. And I was so inspired that with that entrepreneurial bug that I had, decided to start my own companies. And so I went through 4 or 5 years of starting my own companies, starting with a fitness and wellness marketplace called Avigo, which
Nice.
I was in Hong Kong and set up and raised pre-seed money to do and build, and so went through that journey. And then secondly, I had a advisory company called StarLake that was all about expansion in Asia,
Nice.
both in terms of the business expansion, but also how do you raise capital in that part of the world. So that was really the second leg of my journey, and then the final leg I would classify as more the being an operator in growth stage companies. And the standout experience there was being part of the growth journey of a property tech company called Latch, that was manufacturer of digital locks, so it was software and hardware.
Yeah.
And it was sold to developers that were building multi-family large buildings, that now you could, instead of using keys, which have been around and it's hard to use, and if you lose your key, is a digital system that you can use your mobile phone or your or a keypad.
Yes.
To enable not only yourself to gain access, but also your friends, and also delivery packages. So that company grew. When I joined, it had pilot revenue of around $500,000.
Okay.
And that company, I joined that company as the product was getting to product market fit and having that strong pilot revenue right through to above 50 million of revenue. So
Nice.
that real growth J-curve phase where we also did an international expansion. So I was convinced by the CEO, who I knew from Forbes Under 30, which I was nominated from my startups.
Nice.
And the story there was that we met in Israel. We reconnected in Israel, where we met through a entrepreneurship society that I was a part of back in 2011. And then we reconnected in this Israel trip where we were both speaking at this Forbes conference. And the entrepreneur in him sold me this vision of this global business and transforming the access industry, or how real estate and spaces work. And so when I went on a journey to lead the international business, I was vice president of the business and responsible for everything outside of the US. So that journey eventually there was a SPAC IPO in 2021.
Nice.
And so that culminated that learning experience was crazy, because I started off in Hong Kong and then set up China business in Shenzhen, and ended up moving to New York to be at HQ and set up the Canadian business.
Incredible.
So a lot of learnings, and the culmination of some of my learnings from finance and private equity, but also from being a founder and building sales and operations from the ground up.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, look, Melvin, that's an incredible journey that you've been on. I love the way how you framed, those long nights and financial models of private equity as being a baptism of fire, where you really learn about the way that businesses run, and how you sort of identified Rev Ops at an early stage there. But, it's a plethora of different things that you've done. And, again, delighted, to have you here to talk through some of those and sort of the experience that they've given you.
Absolutely. I'm super passionate about business growth, and I'm super passionate about startups and entrepreneurship. So from a professional perspective, I couldn't be more excited to talk about those topics, but also my other passions, music and sport, happy to chat about as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That'll be great. Well, I mean, look, you mentioned that you love, boxing and triathlons and tennis, but on the music side, what are you into?
Yeah, music-wise, I'm newer. I'm more of a listener so far, but I played guitar when I was a kid, and so I have this ambition of getting into music. Maybe at some point in my career when I have a bit more time.
Yeah.
But more recently, I've just been going concerts and listening to different varied varieties of music, and so that's just something that just is incredible, because when you're on the treadmill or you're working, it's just something that uplifts you so much. So it's more of a passive passion.
Yes.
Sport has been my real active passion, and my friends or uni classmates will tell you that I was heavily involved in a lot of sports, and even to today I train. Typically I get in 12 to 14 sessions a week, which means training twice a day, most days, on various sporting projects that I'm on. From, as I mentioned, from my first sport was badminton, actually, where I played for a county, and then I was on the national squad, and then onto sports like triathlon, where I competed as a junior, and then a university boxing and dance sport. So I competed I got a full blue at Oxford for both amateur boxing and Latin ballroom dancing in the same year.
Oh wow, that's
which is
nuts.
Probably to this day my one of my proudest and oddest achievements.
That's fantastic.
So and the reason I think sport has been an important driver in my life is because I think it brings people together. Firstly, I think it's something that unites people, and then secondly, it's something that gets us to perform at our best. It's all about performance, right?
Yeah.
It's competing against yourself, but also against other people, and to bring out the best performance. And I think there's very strong analogies between sport, and there's a lot of different analogies you can draw between parallels between sport and business performance.
Yes.
So I think that's also one of the reasons that lines me to both sport and entrepreneurship.
Yeah, fantastic. That's great. And look, and I hope you don't mind me mentioning, but you mentioned that you did try your hand at doing a couple of video content pieces and sort of podcasts when you were staying at Terra Palace, one of my favorite hotels in Istanbul. And I've forgotten the topic of those videos, but I think they were growth related.
Yeah, absolutely. So in 2021 and 2020, post Latch exit, I took some time off, started a sabbatical of traveling, and it was really just, I'd worked up until then for about 8 or almost 10 years flat out since graduating, and I just decided to take, as COVID hit, we actually went traveling right when there was the lockdowns, and we did it very carefully by figuring out the places that didn't have COVID and what you had to do. But flights and hotels were really cheap at the time. So we set out on this expedition to do Southern Europe, starting with Greece, then went to Portugal and Turkey, where we ultimately went to through Egypt, Kenya, Ethiopia, Tanzania, South Africa, where I spent 6 months playing tennis, and then through to Latin America and finished off in Miami. And that was almost a year, or just over a year. And in Turkey, it was really interesting. We stayed at this very inspirational hotel called Terra Palace, which I think well, given your roots. And I was staying in this Alfred Hitchcock suite, and with a piano. And we would. I filmed one of my episodes of a podcast that I was doing, and that was about investing.
Okay.
So in 2020-21, there was a lot of volatility and stock markets, and so I got involved in stock markets and benefited from some of that growth. In fact, when I was in Turkey, that's when the vaccine came out, and I'd anticipated that there would be a bounce in epicenter stocks and technology stocks. And so that was a very memorable time where that occurred, but also we were having a lot of fun just spending time with friends and just getting to know Turkey. Yeah,
fantastic. Yeah, look, lovely country, and definitely one of my favorite hotels. One day, hopefully I'll film a podcast episode there. I'm still going to chase down the manager of the hotel to join me.
I heard they did almost some sort of Netflix documentary or something about
Midnight at Terra Palace. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. But fantastic. Well, look, Melvin, let's dive into Rev Ops. So why don't we start at the top? For those in the audience that may not have heard the term Rev Ops before, do you mind giving a bit of a sort of intro to it?
Yeah, so I'm not going to give the classical definition as practitioners would do now that run Rev Ops or sales ops, because I think that sometimes makes it a little bit stale in terms of what I think the first principles of it should be. And really the first principles is, how do you take a goal, and usually on the sales and revenue side it's to maximally grow revenue or achieve revenue in a sustained, rapid way.
Yes.
Right, and achieve that in the best possible way through business processes, and in particular aligning business processes and measuring the data that comes out from each stage of business process.
Yes.
So that's my definition. It's how do you meet that business objective using a process that is quantified through data, and consistently improving and iterating over time to maximize your chance to meet that business objective.
Yeah, fantastic. And I think it's really important. What I've seen over the past few years is that everybody talks about sales funnels, right? But what businesses don't think about is actually, like, when it comes to business processes, these are, you can apply the same funnel principle, because anything that drops off is just waste for the business, whether it's cost waste, whether it's time waste. They're all kind of linked together. And when I was at Revolut, the CEO, Nick Storonsky, would always say, like, we take big tasks, we break it down into little bits, and we focus on getting all those little bits done. And that's how you achieve big things, by focusing on those little incrementals.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it is about especially with a growth stage company like Revolut, where you have a clear product market fit, it's more and more about the details of what happens at the transition of each of those funnel stages, what data you track through. You can break those funnels into different sub funnels, and so it's really about the detail. So when Rev Ops means different things for different companies, depending on the stage, and also depending on the type of company, whether it's a B2B company, which is, I'm a bit more focused on that side of things, or it's a direct to consumer company, which I guess Revolut would have come into that category, or it's B2B to C. So it depends on the stage and the type, but absolutely, it's about not leaving it to chance and saying, hey, we'll rely on salespeople or the magic of our product, we'll build it and they'll come. That very rarely is the case. And even in the case of Facebook, it's because they were very, very scientific in their approach to customer acquisition, and were lucky enough to have people like Chamath and whatnot to build those processes who were very technical, that they achieved great success. It's never a case of build it and they'll come. Maybe in the case of, the only cases of build it and they'll come is that I've experienced. I lived in Dubai and I stayed in the Burj Khalifa for a period of time.
Yes, yeah.
And in that case, it is, if you do enough PR, it is a case of you build something so magnificent, they'll come and you create a multiplier effect. But very, very seldom in business that's the case. So you have to do a lot of sales and marketing, and in some cases you have to do even sales development, which is something that's come to separate out the sales from the initial prospecting and qualification of sales leads.
Yeah.
So essentially you do have to be very detail orientated about the process. It isn't a case of build it or come, or it isn't a case of let's rely on a great salesperson. That can get you in the first phases to a early success, but it's definitely not scalable. So to have something that's scalable, that can get you to $1 billion revenue or hundreds of million from a couple of million, there's no way you can do it just by relying on good salespeople or a great product. You have to build and design business processes, and that's what a revenue ops and business ops is about. Yeah,
fantastic. And look, I love how you keep saying the word scientific, because it kind of, it drives home the seriousness of it. So I'm wondering, if we could talk about, maybe a sample process that you may have built before, which, allowed you to be scientific in your approach of, let's say, a particular challenge or opportunity?
Yeah, absolutely. I think essentially you can use some of the learnings that as we built revenue at Latch, and we weren't just building revenue, but I was also solving for international expansion because the company had got to a point where it was ready with a product that was working to go into new markets. And I can talk a little bit about the process of building that and refining that process over time. And that was a 3-year process where each year or each 6 months or quarter, there would be really a change in our approach because the company was growing so quickly in terms of the number of people, the product was evolving, and customer needs and customer demands were also evolving as the product was provided. So in 2018, I joined to set up the global operations and business of Latch. I was initially based out of Hong Kong. As VP of International Markets, and the first thing I did wasn't let's just start hiring salespeople, or let's start hiring marketing people, or let's that came much later. The first part, that 3-month process, and I think it bled into the 4th month as well, was very much let's do the research and analysis on which markets we should go into. Do both primary and secondary. I actually flew around to 8 different markets to do deep diligence, and do conferences, do trade shows, and really deeply speak to customers to understand their needs. So I think the phasing of this is very important. The first part is really, it sounds obvious, but I think people don't necessarily do it. Is that do enough research and work, and then from that 3-month period, we identified markets that we wanted to focus on. Because the other learning from being an entrepreneur is that you can only focus on really one, maximally with the right org, 2 things at a time. And we decided just to focus on one, which was the China market, and then secondly, not at the same time, but in the second phase, the Canadian market. And those were for very specific reasons. And knowing those reasons is also very important. So the first stage in getting to our goal of, okay, how do we build an international business that is meaningful to top and bottom line, but also meaningful from our relationship standpoint and our investors standpoint to affect the company, started with a lot of research. So that was the first step, and then the next step really evolves from a lot of these discussions with customers, and so I'll pause there for now. The first step really was the deep research, where you have to go into each market and do a lot of the work yourself with 1 or 2 people.
If I can ask a probing question there. How do you quantify that research? I mean, how did you rank these markets against each other?
This is possibly the best and most exciting and most difficult question that I like to address. And I think that a lot of companies, almost all companies that want to become really successful and scalable and want to answer, which is, okay, how do you expand into new markets? And that there's no one answer for this. I think that's the first thing that needs to be recognized, that there isn't a framework that you can apply that directly. I think there's principles that you can think about, and so maybe it's a high level framework for thinking about it. But the first thing is, what you got to identify is what really is the goal here in going to the new markets. Right now, I'm looking at a company and in discussion with a company that I may work with, where they're thinking through the same thing. They have an AI product that is in a a leader in a small market in Southeast Asia, Singapore. But now, once you get to a certain level, you end up hitting a ceiling. So then, what is the next markets, right? And as I think through, and I'm still in this phase of thinking this through alongside the founder, and seeing if there's something that's really exciting to work on. Is okay. We want to grow, right? But what is the objective of entering a new market, specifically, for example, in the first year and in the second year?
Yeah.
Then that will tell you about, okay, which markets to enter, because obviously the US is a huge market. Then you have other markets like Hong Kong and other Southeast Asian markets like Thailand, Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia. But then you also have Australia. And then so in thinking about that question, the way I framed it from a high level perspective wasn't necessarily, okay, what is just the biggest market that we could go into, right? It is, what do you want to achieve in the first year and 2 years? And in for that company, in order to become the ubiquitous product and company and have a chance of revolutionizing the space there, and is healthcare, you need to think about, in order to raise capital at the right rate, and in order to be seen as a venture backable company, you need to be growing at 2x or 3x in the first stages of your growth. So they have that concept of triple, double, double, double.
Yes.
So that's the goal. It's to be able to grow in that rhythm of double or tripling in the first years. You don't need to grow at 6x, but you don't want to grow at 40%, which currently they've been growing at 40%. So when you think about a market, the first thing is, can that market in the next 2 years get us to that company to the point of growing 2x to 3x? Will it tap out? So you can't go into a too small a market that after 1 year it already taps out. But then you don't need the market to be as big as the US market. The Australian market is orders of magnitude bigger than the Singaporean market. So that's an example of, okay, start with the goal and then work back logically from that, and something as simple as, okay, what do we need to achieve in the next 2 years?
That ties back really well to the research phase that you mentioned, because what you're looking at is, all right, like, if our hypothesis or our goal is, we need to do 3x, 3x, 2x, 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 what am I hearing at this conference? Are we actually aligning our solution to problems that customers are facing? What's the value of those problems? And then does that translate to that revenue forecast that needs to keep the VCs or investors happy?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's so many questions when you look at a new market, right? There's from regulation to political risk to competitive products. Data privacy is a big trend now. That there's just, when you put this on a matrix, it can just become overwhelming with the things you have to consider. So the first step, I think, is to narrow it down to the most basic questions of is your product minimally viable, and can you get your product to be in a place that it's meeting the needs of customers there? Your value proposition, is it consistent? Say you are for example, you were in the Hong Kong market or Singapore market, and your product was successful there and had a clear value proposition and addressed the pain point, which is what you need for your product to do in order to be successful. Can that apply in that market? But that's a very basic question. If you don't answer that, it's just, you might have to be, a lot of times you have to almost end up building your product again. That's an experience I went through with Latch, where we had a hardware product as well. So when we looked at certain markets, you have fire code and you have a difference in the type of lock that you use, and different parts of the world there's two prevailing types in the modern world: deadbolt and mortise locks. And they're very fundamentally different. A deadbolt is just literally a bolt, and a mortise is a much more secure mechanism for latching a door. So there, and then you have different types of mortises and deadbolts, and that have to conform to fire regulations. So there we realize very quickly that we have to figure out that part of the puzzle before your product can even go on offer. So we had to look at that and look at the costs of localizing the product. You have to think about other things like language and cultural differences. But there's the order of the sequencing of these problems is important. First, is that market big enough and attractive enough to meet our goal of sustaining of that mission of tripling or doubling in the next couple of years? It can't be too small that you tap out after you tap out, right? But then secondly, are the fundamentals there where your product can conceivably solve the problem in that market, or is the problem in that market just a different nature? So once you've answered those, then you can go into the other risks of okay, is there regulation? How much competition is there? Is it cornered by, in some markets like the UAE market, a lot of the industry, some of the industries are somewhat cornered by certain families that are promoting businesses. So in the UAE, typically you have to, you can't operate independently. You have to have a sponsor that is Emirati. Wow. And so that's an example. But those questions then come a little bit later and tend to be solvable. So if you have a great product, you can probably find a group that's willing to sponsor you. But then, ultimately, you have to make sure that the UAE market is big enough for it to make sense. If your whole growth initiative is based on expansion into the UAE, if you find Majid Al Futtaim to come as your cornerstone sponsor, and then you get into that industry, is it big enough to justify that effort? And I think every international expansion effort does take a minimal amount of, and it's, when I say minimal, it's a lot. There's a certain amount of work you have to do to even get off the ground. You have to have management, attention, flying in and out. You have to hire people. You have to figure out the local regulations to set up your entity, and anything that you do wrong is a risk to the company. So realizing that allows you to then think, okay, let's be very careful. The worst thing anyone could do is do an international strategy or expansion strategy where it's, let's try going into 3 markets at the same time. It's very, very rare that works because of that, of the nuances between markets and operationally how difficult it is to enable the teams there to work well.
Fantastic. So look, I guess phase 1, you're doing a lot of research, you're understanding the viability of hidden 3x, 3x, 2x, 2x. You're picking the right market to go in based upon, your product market fit, considering political risk, or any other local market risk. I think that's fantastic. Let's dive into the next stage.
So the next stage, once you've figured out the markets, you got to design your revenue org, and it's going to depend on the type of company. I'm in the enterprise space and selling to medium-sized businesses and up, so mid-market and up. Enterprise is typically average contract value, ACV, in the hundreds of thousands, 100,000 and up. And then mid-market is between 100,000 and 50,000. So that's why I'll talk more about that. I think it's so specific that you have to, that motion of sales is very important. So it doesn't apply for product-led PLG, as they call it. Product-led growth is very different. It's where you try and service some customers on your website and they sort of self-service, and that's for ACVs of in the hundreds or thousands of dollars. So I can't really cover that. Small businesses is very different. It's a lot more centric around your strategy on Google AdWords and social media. And then there's above enterprise. I have some experience which is strategic, but that's even bigger. That's $1 million contracts.
So
my core experiences on medium, SMB, and enterprise. But actually, you'll find that with SaaS, which is all the rage now, and that's the prevailing business model, that enterprise and SMB covers most of it.
Indeed.
Strategic is you're selling to BMW or you're selling to Boeing, and that's a different kettle of fish where huge sales cycles. You have to set up, integrate everything. It can cost you millions to even get the integration ready and set up ready.
Yeah.
So just focusing on enterprise and SMB or medium size to enterprise. The typical sales funnel you start off with is figure out the value proposition, and then from there, what is the marketing strategy? The marketing strategy, then the next phase is typically sales. So you have sales people that are going to be targeting accounts. Typically with the more enterprises, they call it account-based marketing. So you're not just sending emails to everyone, you're sending specific campaigns to targeted accounts in your TAM or total addressable market. And so I'm trying to not use jargon as much as possible, but that are in market. Your TAM isn't everyone that you could sell to. It's people who are ready and can buy from you. So you have your sales, and then you have your success. So that's typically the three areas: marketing, sales, and success. But then you can break it down more. Initially, you have that, and as you build your funnel, you become more and more sophisticated, because then you realize, for example, with sales, it can make sense once you have a certain amount of sales to separate out the people closing deals from the people qualifying and prospecting. So then you have a sales development function which sits between marketing and sales. And then even after sales, which is a hugely important, after the sale or the commit, is a hugely important under-emphasized aspect of enterprise software, which is, what do you do after the commit? How do you expand revenue? And that's typically a much better way of growing than just sales, because it's you already have that customer. There you can break it into onboarding, and then you have your CSM, customer success, and then you have more accounts. So it's sort of after your sale, you have still three phases which you can separate it out into. And as you go further and further, the emphasis is more on expanding, trying to get customers to spend more, trying to get customers to expand that product into different departments or different other parts of the organization. But so that's the post sale. Pre-sale is, as I mentioned, is that marketing, and then you have your between marketing and sales, you have your sales development organization. So it ends up splitting out into this bow tie, which is 3 phases pre-commit and 3 phases post-commit. And in terms of when you design that process, I mentioned the word iterative. It's really important that you don't start out with that full bow tie because at every stage you have two things. You have the time required for getting through that stage of the funnel, and you have the chance of success, right? What the meetings that you do, for example, you might do a demo in the sales process, or you might do a discovery call with a client in the between marketing and sales. So the emphasis is that you don't try and make everything perfect at the beginning. You build out your structure over time. And typically, in my experience, as for example in the Latch situation, it takes around end to end. I think it takes actually 1 to 2 years to get to a mature revenue funnel. Initially, you just have some marketing fire cover, and then you have one salesperson that you're trying to get to work, or if you're lucky enough, you can find a sales leader that comes with a sales team. Which is, I was lucky at Latch, where I found someone from Apple, Vincent, who I was able to, from my network, to hire, and he came with some people that he already had worked with.
Nice.
So that's another segment we should talk about, which is execution of this process. But ultimately, it needs to be phased. You can't expect everything to be, if you design it to be over complex at the beginning, it won't work. You have to start simple, and then over time layer it, but also layer it knowing the next steps instead of just what happens a lot of times we see with founders is that they'll start off with founder-led growth, which is the CEO selling, going to conferences, and that works only up to a certain phase. That may get you to that 1 or 2 million of recurring revenue, and then it comes a point of how do we go beyond that? And really it's they haven't thought about how do we sequentially structure the growth of this sales and revenue org, and to incorporate an element of Rev Ops at that each stage, understanding the KPIs and the data so that you can grow this sustainably and over time.
Yeah, indeed. And look, I really like the way that you described it as a kind of bow tie, because, you're like, all right, you got your marketing, SDRs and sales, and then, onboarding, customer success and account management, let's say, because Rev Ops can come in and say, all right, look, if we can just tweak the incrementals at each stage here, what effect is that going to have all the way at the end on the bottom line? So that's a fantastic way of putting it. I might nick it from you, to be honest.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the key magic of it, is with a great Rev Ops function or person that has access to the data, and you just set it up correctly so that you're getting the right data, accurate data, because a lot of salespeople, they won't necessarily populate things and give you the data. But say once you get the right data and set it up correctly, it's almost like magic, because you can sit there and you can put different numbers in, and you can run this sensitivity that says, oh, if I improve the rate of success in this part of the funnel, say it's between MQL and SQL, which is between the marketing and sales development.
Yes.
By doing this, that has this effect on our growth for that quarter or for that month. It's almost like a magic switch where you can say, we're now going to put some more budget here, and boom, that has a certain effect. And then you could say, oh, instead of doing that, what about if we did this with the success? If we improve success between the onboarding and success, and you can say, okay, what's the magnitude of the ROI on the spending there? So you can really manage it in a way where that the dollars that you're putting into your company, the hard-earned revenue or hard-earned investment that you've raised, you can do it in a way that is scientific, and that's going to be either incremental to your company, which in which case you should do it, or it's going to actually it's not incremental, because you find the money you spend, say for example on marketing, it's too expensive and it doesn't lead to a recurring revenue in a way that potentially you're spending $1 and you're only getting 80 cents of recurring revenue at the end of the day.
Yeah, indeed. And look, I want to tie back into the execution piece. You mentioned you'd hired someone called Vincent from Apple who, was fantastic at it. And I guess, my question is about how businesses can really create a data-driven, accountable culture. I guess, hiring in good people is one way, but I'm wondering, if you can sort of touch upon that execution piece and how that ties into being data-driven.
Yeah, so really the execution part of it, I think of two things. One is you need management alignment to say, hey, we are going to put effort into this, into allowing us to thoughtfully develop a process that makes sense and is going to be optimal, rather than let's just put it together and see. So management attention to say, this is the way we're going to do it. And then the second aspect, which is hard, potentially even harder, is recruiting, because you got to get the right people into who they can then understand that process. So that beautiful bow tie that you've drawn out that you're going to execute, get to in 2 years or a year and a half, you have to have people who understand that, not only at the theoretical level and the first principles, but practically, what does it mean to reduce time of meetings or reduce the number of meetings, right? Or what does it mean to actually improve the success rate of a meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Those concepts sound good, but doing them is hard, and getting your team to show up for meetings on time, getting them to structure the meeting in the right way with an agenda, and get through the meeting, not leave parts out and then rush the end. And right, those things are come with experience. So you need really experienced people who are smart enough and practical enough to look at the theory of how you put it together. That comes down from your CRO or your VP of international, or your the finance team, and say, hey, here's how then we actually practically execute it.
Yes.
And you need that constant attention from, I would say, the CFO is very important, and your COO or your CEO, preferably all three, that is giving you fire cover to say, hey, we're building this. It's going to take time. Firstly, it's not going to come all together at once, and you suddenly have a lot of revenue, and it's going to take time and resources to design. But then also you need the right people, so we're going to give you the enough time. Typically, I think it can take 6 months to hire someone really, really great, especially if they're coming external from an agency.
Yeah.
If they're referred, it can be much quicker, and because you have that referencing. But those are the two things. It's management attention, and it's really, really great people.
Yeah, fantastic. And then I guess, like salespeople and marketing, to an extent, I guess they're always focused on the numbers, quite often because it might affect their commission. But when it comes to the wider organization, when you've got product and tech teams, how do you get them to be more data-centric, particularly if it can impact on some of the incrementals in that bow tie that you described?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's now going even beyond just revenue ops, or just how do we get the most out of this sales funnel, into that's even more advanced, which is into how can we learn insights as we sell and service customers that feed into the product, that make the product better, that then creates this self-fulfilling positive spiral where your product gets better, then you're able to sell more, and with the customers you already have, you're able to internally expand more.
Yes.
And that's something that I've been thinking, especially in the last 2 or 3 years, much more carefully about, and it's still a work in progress, but I'm now coming to terms with that. You have to, in your post-commit part of the funnel of the bow tie, really be thoughtful about how you collect information and work with customers to understand their needs from a revenue perspective. So which means partnering with product,
yes,
and the engineering, but you almost have to partly wear this product and engineering hat, because you're going to be an onboarder, or you're going to be a CSM, or you're going to be a account manager, and your job technically isn't to help improve the product. That's product, but you're going to be the first point of contact. So you're going to listen and be intimately aware of what is the issue, what is an opportunity for the product to move into. So I think there, having some level of product training for your post-sales staff and team is very beneficial. Just getting people in the same room and working together. I think I've seen orgs where there has been quite a silo between product and this revenue org. That's one silo, and the other silo is, I see a lot, is between marketing and sales.
Yes,
just different types of people, right? Product people are very different from sales people, very different from marketing people. Then as a leader, as a sales leader, your obligation and the magic is, how do you put people in the same room, and how do you align processes between marketing and sales, between product and customer success?
Yes, yeah. And I think, one of the skills that I think is, underemphasized, similarly to how you put it before, is the fact that a CSM might see that, 50% of customers aren't using a particular product. If they can increase that number from 50% to 75% by getting product to make a couple of tweaks, they could have a revenue effect of millions of dollars. And so it's how can you, I guess, align that CSM's remuneration with, you know, the interface with product.
Yeah, some of this is tricky, right? To do it directly. I think with salespeople, they're very directly motivated by commission. With success folks, it's slightly less so. Success folks are a different breed, and so my approach there is, I always like to have at least some component of the remuneration based on how well does the company do overall. How well does the revenue org overall? How well does the company do overall? And you can't overdo it, because with sales, typically most companies is really 100% driven by commission by their part. But what I like to do is have a commission structure where you do the normal thing of accelerators once you hit your OTE and whatnot. But I like to have certain metrics, as say you're a salesperson, you're account executive, that some of your commission is dependent on how well the customer is retained. So it bleeds into onboarding and success. So if the customer you onboard is not retained, then that can have effect. Or if the customer equally, if they're upsold or there's expansion on that, then you also have some component. And then the final component is, if the company does really well, hey, maybe there's a 10% component that the company hits its targets, you get an extra percent. So that you can design it in a way that like that. Ultimately, the final thing I would say about that remuneration piece is that a lot of it is also just getting people to feel that they are valued and feel that they are making an impact. So if you can just applaud people in meetings for doing things that might not drive direct commission but really drive success. If you can, maybe you can have I think we ran different sales award programs at Latch and different companies I've worked with, and just give them recognition. People want recognition. They don't just care about necessarily money. So recognition with the right incentive structure is best.
Indeed. And look, just looping back to a point you made earlier about, let's say, sales being founder-led up until the 1 million ARR mark, you know, when they're deciding to sort of hand that baton on and they're hiring in, you know, a salesperson, what type of multiplier do you expect from the salesperson if they're being paid, let's say, 100K a year? How much revenue should they be delivering? Should it be 5x? Should it be 10x? What's your view there?
So there's different ranges for. Firstly, I mean, the obvious thing is you should benchmark it. But benchmarking is only part of it. Let's start from first principles again. Which is, you know, a lot of people benchmark to so they don't have to start from first principles, which is good to a point, but it's always good to start from first principles. And the first principle is you want to incentivize someone to deliver sales, but at the same time, you got to recognize early on your ability to deliver sales isn't that scientific, because you haven't figured out all of the product market fit aspects. You haven't figured out the very important concept in sales is ICP, your ideal client or customer profile. That is absolutely critical. If you don't have that, you really are just shooting in the dark. So you have to identify that. You have to identify clearly your core value proposition. What does, not from your perspective, but from the client's perspective, how do they see it? Without those two pieces of information, you're not going to sell much. So initially, in early days, the principle is try and get them sell, but because they don't have so much data to sell on, I wouldn't tie a lot on commissions. Once it becomes more mature and you have a repeatable process and a playbook that you build, a playbook can take 3 months to 6 months to build when you're entering a new market. Once then you can look at benchmarks and say, hey, it's typically 50%, 60% is driven by commission, and the rest is base salary, and you know, changes from stage of company and seniority of whether they're an account executive, or they're doing some management duties as well. But I think start with the what is the purpose of this remuneration structure, and then design it according to that and iterate. So it's not going to be the same after you become more mature. It's going to become more refined. It's going to become more based on benchmarks, as opposed to initially it's, again, let's figure this out.
Yeah, fantastic, excellent. Well, look, Melvin, I think we've done a real good deep dive into Rev Ops there. I wanted to loop over to something a little bit different in case there's any that you want to share. I mean, you've worked for a range of different companies. I don't know if there's a war story or two that, stand out as being, either funny or things that you've really learnt from that you wanted to share.
War stories. Okay, I guess I have one from the Canadian expansion that we embarked on when I was at Latch, and it was just getting the first client on board was just the toughest experience, because they were actually a channel partner that we worked with, and getting internal buy-in to do a channel program, and they wanted to buy a large amount of product.
Yeah.
And so it was a multi-million-dollar deal, and would have made a lot of financial sense. The war story there was that you had to get that big first deal done. It required so much internal alignment between the channel team, the channel sales team, and finance and operations, because you had to think about the legal, other localization issues there, although there weren't huge amounts between Canada and the US, but there were still some. That process, I just remember we just did 5 or 6 trips. I was based out of New York, and I was flying to Toronto, and ultimately we got it done.
Yeah.
But working with the partner there, and then working with the developers there to ultimately sell through to, when you try and get a really big deal done, it sometimes is just way slower. So on paper it looks great, and so that wasn't necessarily a war story, in that we did end up being successful in getting a deal done, but it was at the expense of potentially we could have got a smaller deal done as a potential beachhead.
Yeah.
Instead of getting that really big deal done, which then took ultimately more than 6 months to get done, and was just painful. I remember doing these little flights into Toronto on these small planes from New York on Porter Airlines, propeller planes, and then going straight to the client side and just doing a lot of negotiation in the middle of different parts of Toronto, and so the learning there is, hey, you do need a beachhead when you enter a new market, but you don't necessarily need to do a multi-million-dollar deal. Get a smaller deal done and use that to activate the larger deals. Yeah,
no, I really like that. And, I think it's important to just start, putting numbers on the scoreboard. I've seen too many salespeople, not hit their commission targets because they're always waiting for the big one, which then at the end, can just fall through. And the big one, the chance of that falling through is always higher. The sales cycle is always longer, and you always make the excuse that I know that one because that's come through a contact. But really, the bigger it is, the ACV as it goes up, your sales cycle just increases, and your chance of failure increases. So the learning there was, hey, just take the smaller one first, prove it out, and then it de-risks the bigger one. Indeed, that's it. Fantastic. And look, Melvin, before we wrap up, any key takeaways that you'd like to share with the audience, just, I guess, about what's brought you success in your career?
Yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't say super success yet. I think I'm still on that journey, but I think take a first principles, unbiased approach to growth. Get great people. You can't do it on your own. Get great people. Make that transition as from founder-led to growth stage by getting the right team in place, the right principles and thinking in place, so that you're building a company.
Yeah.
You're not building just a product.
Yes.
Make that transition. Give the right reward people. People will come if they're rewarded with the right structures and equity.
Yeah.
And I believe in that. And make that transition and get your product out into the world.
Fantastic. Melvin, thanks so much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing where else you visit on your journey, mate.
Thanks, Lucas. Appreciate it.
You're most welcome. Thank you.